This is a story of neighbors helping neighbors during a time of catastrophe and crisis, and I've titled it Good Neighbors. The year is 2005, and it's the morning of August the 29th. Americans living along the Gulf Coast of the United States had already heard reports of a huge storm heading their way. That morning, a hurricane approximately 400 miles wide and carrying winds of 100 to 140 miles per hour reached our coastline. Think of it in these terms. This out of control meteorological freak was about the same size as the entire state of Colorado. By the time all was said and done, this monster, in the form of a tempest named Hurricane Katrina, had indiscriminately and brutally killed over 2,000 people and affected over 90,000 square miles of American territory. Hundreds of thousands of our citizens were displaced, and a conservative estimate of the damages done exceeded $100 billion. In New Orleans, tens of thousands sought shelter at the Superdome and other large buildings, some of which they had to break into. At the time, around 30% of New Orleans was living in poverty. Most poor people had no means of escape since they didn't even have cars. Corpses could be seen floating down the streets in some areas. Days later, on September 8th, huge trucks and other heavy equipment barreled, roared, rambled, and thundered their way up Interstate 35 to San Antonio, Texas. This was a 45 vehicle convoy consisting of 2,000 personnel making its way to San Antonio to distribute clean water, medical supplies, and upwards of 7,000 hot meals a day for survivors of the hurricane. But where did this convoy of determined, brave, compassionate, and kind souls come from? In fact, they had driven over 700 miles across half of Mexico, all the way up from Mexico City. This was the Mexican military, and it was coming to provide much needed aid to their neighbors and friends to the north, the United States. When they got to San Antonio, they were told they could not serve the beef they brought with them to serve meals to the victims because it had not been USDA approved. In spite of that, these Mexican soldiers went ahead and bought beef locally to fill the gap. By the time their mission was done, the Mexican military had served 170,000 meals, helped to distribute 184,000 tons of supplies, and provided more than 500 medical consultations. This was the first time the Mexican military had been to San Antonio since 1836. It was back in 1836 that Mexican forces were in San Antonio during the Texas Revolution. But this time, September of 2005, Americans living in Texas and Mexicans found themselves united in an endeavor of compassion, understanding, kindness, hope, and goodwill. This time, they were all just human beings who were acting as good neighbors.